Okay, where were we? Hello, I want to share with you a story. I'm not sure which story. I'm not good at planning, but I think that's okay. Well, let me put this on speaker. This is hard to talk about. I was in a BDSM relationship, specifically a DS relationship. The person offered to be my daddy. I asked what that meant, and I was told that it could be whatever I wanted. And promises were made, and this is a caller from that relationship. Ultimately, that relationship did not meet my needs. And the fact that it was a DS relationship ultimately provided a structure that I was very vulnerable, and I wanted to meet the needs of my partner, and being in that relationship harmed me. And I wish that I had left it sooner, because it was so difficult for me to have space to be myself in that relationship. And I don't want to paint all relationships that have BDSM structures with the same brush. I believe that there can be transformative, restorative, healing, and so much love within BDSM experiences and relationships. And sometimes there can be extreme vulnerabilities when we are in, especially, a power exchange dynamic. And it's important to take extra steps and structures to protect the safety and the mental health of everybody involved, especially the people that are on the more submissive side of those relationships. When I tried to ask for a boundary because I felt like I was giving too much, I was punished, and I lost myself. And what I learned in that moment was to deny that feeling of giving too much and that need to set boundaries and to focus on the needs of my partner at my expense. And leaving that relationship was the best decision that I've made in my life. I thought that we were going to be life partners. I thought that we were making a serious commitment, and I felt like I was being used for my body and for my sex, and so many promises were not followed up with. And it's important to notice those things. And because of the power exchange, it felt like I wasn't a priority. And I know that that is not the case for many other relationships. However, sometimes one person's well-being is prioritized, and sometimes people can be taken for granted. And for most of my life, I took myself for granted. And perhaps I can be grateful for that relationship, because after leaving it, I'm now building this relationship with myself where I don't want to take myself for granted. I don't want to overlook my needs and boundaries. And I want to find people that have the skills and the willingness to show up in a way that is nourishing and safe and loving, holistic for everybody involved. One story is coming to mind. We had sex frequently in this relationship, and one day I was not in the mood, and my partner took it extremely personally and overreacted, and it ended up feeling like there wasn't space for me to say, I'm not in the mood. And it's so important that everybody has space to do that if we want to build trauma-informed relationships where consent means something we all have a responsibility to actively make space for our partners to say no, no matter who we are, no matter what our dynamic is. Consent is a responsibility for each and every one of us. I've had other issues with people not practicing building consent and communication and safety. And technically, what this partner did wasn't a consent violation, but the way that my no was received made me feel like I can't say no. And if we don't feel like we can't say no, then is there really a meaningful yes? And this applies not only to BDSM contexts, but any context, even non-sexual contexts. We need to have space to say no, or else our yes is basically meaningless. I want to invite us to practice actively making space for ourselves and the people that we interact with to say no, and to welcome that and encourage that, and to honor and respond with empathy as opposed to taking it personally. There are so many moments in our day-to-day lives when we might be expected to say yes to something that maybe we don't want a hug. Maybe we don't want butter on our croissant. Maybe we don't want fill in the blank. And to make space for that no is something that I'm trying to do each and every day. It was even difficult to get this necklace back from my former partner when I asked for it, because it was given to me. I was told that it was mine, and I managed to eventually receive this. But this person also gave me snowshoes in a really dramatic fashion, and it was supposed to be a gift for me, but when I asked to have them at the end of our relationship, because they were in possession of them, they basically ghosted me over snowshoes that were given to me in this really intense, uncomfortable way, where I was driven to a location with an eye mask on, and I didn't even really want snowshoes, but I think this was one of those situations where somebody gives you a gift that really they want. And I was in the store with the eye mask on. It was very vulnerable and uncomfortable, and it didn't feel good. And I don't know if I don't think any of it was really about me, especially since they've kept the snowshoes that were a gift. I would call these experiences disappointing daddy experiences. And I don't want to say that this person is trying to be a disappointing daddy, However, I think sometimes people disappoint us in really significant ways, even when they're not trying to, and they're probably doing their best. And some people's best is disappointing. And we need to protect ourselves from these disappointments when it can have a dramatic impact on our mental health and even our physical health, because with my disappointing daddy, I would experience some back pain because of certain things that we did. And when I would try to bring it up, it felt like there wasn't space for me to talk about my back pain and how we could change how we moved to protect my back. And there were a lot of red flags that I let slide for well over a year, and I will never get that time back, but I can be grateful for the life lessons of leaving that relationship and finding myself, which I think if I had stayed in that relationship, I would not have been able to find myself. I would not have been able to fully realize how deeply disappointing this daddy was. And now I know what I want and what I need. And I'm being cautious. I'm phenomenally single at the moment and building up my relationship with myself and building up my skills at loving myself and listening to myself and honoring myself, because those months and months and months and months I lost myself. And it takes time to love ourselves and to find ourselves. And sometimes we need to leave a relationship that claims to be loving, but then I don't think that that was love when I couldn't ask for what I needed, when I couldn't set a boundary. And this person told me that I was loved unconditionally, but I don't even think it was love. And it was deeply conditional, and really it was quite toxic to stay in that relationship for so long. If anybody finds themselves in a similar situation with somebody that perhaps is well-meaning and doing their best and doesn't have the skills and the space to support our needs and boundaries, I would highly encourage folks to take space for connecting with ourselves, for loving ourselves. And if we're not able to do that in a relationship, I don't think that that relationship is loving. And some people will use the language of love to keep people around without showing up in a significant way for our well-being. And I think it's really important that we talk about this and talk about how we all have a responsibility to ourselves and each other to build safety each and every day with our words and our bodies, to have conversations about safety, about consent, to check in. These can be difficult to talk about, and building safety is a muscle that we can strengthen. And it starts today. Hopefully it started well before today. However, unfortunately, I think so many people aren't having these conversations yet, and I'm hoping that today can be a day to start having these conversations. One example of conversations that are often not happening but need to happen would be around choking one person who calls themselves a daddy, a different person than who I was talking about, choked me without my consent, without checking in before doing that. And it really messed with my head. And we need to have conversations about choking before choking somebody. And the person who did this is a counselor and knows better and knew that it would have a significant impact on my mental health, which it did, and it was not a positive impact. And in some ways I still feel like I'm healing from that experience, even though it's been a number of years. And some people know better, and I think some people don't. Somebody who calls themselves a kink-aware therapist knows that you need to have consent before choking somebody. And I would hope that everybody knew that. And I realized that I need to be a part of the change of having these conversations and talking about these issues, because we all need to be having these conversations. And okay, I need to take a break, but thank you for having this heart-to-heart with me. And I wish that we didn't need to have such challenging and potentially activating conversations in order to build the safety that we need as a society to heal, to love, and to have complex structures and dynamics. It is absolutely possible to have healthy, kinky, and BDSM and DS dynamics. And also sometimes some relationships that are kinky and some relationships that are not kinky are not safe and are causing harm to one or both of the people, or all of the people involved, because some relationships have more than two people. We have a lot of work to do as a society, and I believe that we can make it better. And I want to model sharing some of my stories and being vulnerable and talking about some of the challenges that I've experienced along the way. That was exhausting. Oh, I should probably hang up on here. This necklace. I don't know what to do with it. I like the design, but I don't like the history. But I suppose having that relationship, even though it was deeply challenging and harmful in the moment, I think today, because of making changes in my life, I am becoming more intentional about love and communication and mental health in a way that perhaps I never would have been if I hadn't participated in a relationship that was so not, it's hard to put into words, but sometimes it feels like there's a balance and there's space for each person to really be who they are. And sometimes it feels like one person has to shrink themselves in order to preserve the relationship. And that was my experience of this relationship, was that to continue it, I needed to deny some of my needs and some of the boundaries that I would have had for my mental health. And I recognize my role in preserving the relationship, and I'm so grateful that I was able to leave when I did. It's been years since I've left. I do still feel disappointed, and I also feel like I am healing. I feel like I am learning to love myself fiercely. And maybe that is because of how little love I gave to myself in that relationship. Looking back, it wasn't love. It was codependency, it was anxiety, it was survival, it was complex mental health experiences. Today, I want to love myself in as many ways as possible. There are infinite ways to love ourselves. And we don't need to have a partner to love ourselves. We don't need to be in a particular type of relationship, kinky or not, to love ourselves. And while I was in that relationship, I don't think I had that awareness that I could experience love without having a life partner. And eventually it became clear to me that this wasn't a life partner, that it wouldn't be a life partner that I would want to share my life with based on those experiences. I felt like I was being treated like a friend with benefits, and what I wanted was partnership. There's a big gap there. I want to thank myself for noticing that gap and leaving. Sometimes we need to leave, and it can be so difficult to leave. And looking back, that is the best decision that I've made in my life, to leave this relationship. Thank you for listening. I hope it was helpful.